The dusty archives of Research Station Omega-7 had been Zara Nightfall's sanctuary for 3 years, a place where she could lose herself among the fragments of galactic history. Without the complications of living beings, the station floated at the edge of civilized space, forgotten by most, which suited her perfectly. She'd come here after her heart was shattered by a lover who claimed she cared more about the past than the present. Maybe he was right. Zara brushed silver dust from an ancient data crystal, her violet eyes straining in the dim lighting she preferred. The crystal contained records from the Great Expansion period, when 7 species had first formed the Galactic Confederation. But like so many artifacts from that era, something felt wrong about it. The Nalari had contacted 17 species during expansion, according to this record, but only 16 were listed. The missing entry wasn't corrupted or lost, it had been deliberately removed, surgically excised from the data with precision that spoke of systematic erasure. It was the 47th such gap she'd found in the past month. Her delicate fingers traced the crystal's surface, noting the way information flowed around an absence like water around a stone. 3,000 years of galactic history, and yet, certain periods seemed hollow, as if entire chapters had been carefully extracted while leaving the surrounding context intact. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Zara sighed, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders as she leaned back in her chair. The universe had an irritating habit of interrupting her work just when patterns began emerging. Nightfall. Here, she answered, activating the holographic projector with a wave of her hand. The image that materialized made her breath catch. The being before her was unlike any species in galactic records. Tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to hold starlight beneath its surface and eyes deep enough to contain galaxies. But it was the emotional resonance she felt that truly unsettled her. A connection that bypassed logic and spoke directly to something in her chest. "Greetings, keeper of memories," the being said, and his voice carried harmonics that made her pulse quicken. "I am Orion Dreamwalker. I've been searching for someone like you for 3 millennia. Zara's scholarly instincts warred with an inexplicable attraction that made her palms damp. Searching for what, exactly? Someone who notices what others overlook. Someone who sees the spaces where truth used to exist. Orion's form seemed to shift slightly, as if he existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. You've found the gaps, haven't you? The places where an entire species was carefully erased from history. Her heart hammered against her ribs. That's theoretically impossible. You can't erase a spacefaring civilization from galactic records without leaving massive inconsistencies that would be immediately obvious to any competent historian. Unless, Orion said with a smile that transformed his otherworldly features into something almost familiar, you replace them with something else. Unless you don't just remove the records, you remove the memory of the records ever existing. Zara felt her academic world tilting on its axis. That would require technology beyond anything in Confederation databases. Memory manipulation on a galactic scale, affecting billions of minds across dozens of species simultaneously. Exactly. Orion agreed, which is why everyone assumes it's impossible instead of investigating why the evidence keeps pointing toward it anyway. She stared at him, her mind racing through implications that made her feel dizzy. You're claiming to be from this erased species, humanity, he said simply. We were the 8th founding member of the Galactic Confederation. We were your partners, your friends, your lovers, for over 1,000 years. Then something began hunting us systematically, not just destroying our bodies, but consuming our very existence from the timeline itself. The weight of revelation settled on Zara's shoulders, like a physical burden. Every instinct told her this was elaborate fantasy, but the evidence had been accumulating for months in fragments and absences that suddenly made terrible sense. If humanity was completely erased from galactic memory, she whispered, "How are you here? How do you still exist?" Orion's expression grew tender in a way that made her chest ache with longing she didn't understand. Because we didn't just flee when we realized what was happening. We transformed. We learned to exist in quantum superposition, in the spaces between moments, in the probability waves that exist before reality chooses which version to manifest. That's scientifically impossible according to everything we know about consciousness and physics. So was erasing an entire species from galactic memory. Yet the evidence is sitting right there in your archives. He gestured toward her collection of crystalline data storage units. We had to become something new to survive something that shouldn't have been possible. Zara looked around her sanctuary of dusty crystals and forgotten histories, suddenly seeing it through new eyes, not a repository of dead information, but a crime scene where the murder of an entire civilization's memory had taken place. Why? Me specifically, she asked. There are thousands of archivists and historians across Confederation space. Because you're not just any archivist, are you? You have an intuitive gift for seeing patterns others miss, for finding connections in apparent chaos. His voice softened. And because you're lonely in the same way we've been lonely, disconnected from the present, living in memories and possibilities rather than engaging with what's right in front of you. The observation cut deeper than any romantic rejection ever had. Zara realized that her retreat to this isolated station hadn't been about scholarly pursuits. It had been about avoiding the vulnerability of connection, of caring about something that could be lost. What do you want from me? She asked quietly. Help us return, Orion said. We learn to exist in quantum superposition, but we need someone in baseline reality to anchor us, to remember us back into existence. We need someone who understands that love isn't just between individuals, it's between entire ways of being, entire possibilities for what consciousness can become. As he spoke, Zara felt something unprecedented awakening in her chest, not just attraction to this impossible being, but recognition of a pattern larger than anything she'd ever studied. The gaps in galactic history weren't just about missing information. They were about missing connections, relationships that had once existed between species and had been surgically removed from collective memory. If I help you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, what happens to me? Orion's smile held promise and transformation in equal measure. You stop hiding in the past and start creating the future. But I should warn you, once you begin remembering us back into existence, you can never be quite the same. Love that. Spans dimensions, changes you at the quantum level. Zara looked at her archives one last time, then back at the impossible being who had offered her something she'd never dared dream of, a love story that could reshape reality itself, a chance to heal wounds carved into the fabric of galactic civilization. Show me, she said simply. Kai Stormwind had always believed that reality followed rules, even when those rules seemed impossible to understand. Standing in his quantum laboratory on the industrial moon of Nexus Prime, surrounded by equations that predicted impossible energy outputs, he was beginning to question that fundamental assumption about the universe. The theoretical framework had come to him in dreams. Over the past 3 weeks, complex mathematical structures that describe energy states existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When he'd run the calculations, they suggested technology that could reshape matter at the subatomic level, bend spacetime like fabric, and access power sources that existed outside normal physics. The equations were beautiful, elegant, and completely unprecedented in Confederation scientific literature. Still working on your impossible energy project? Asked his research partner, Vex, floating into the lab on his anti-gravity cushion. The Zalran's blue skin rippled with amusement patterns as he observed Kai's latest prototype. The math keeps checking out, Kai muttered, adjusting the crystalline array that formed the heart of his experimental device. According to these calculations, consciousness itself can influence quantum probability states, not observe them, actually alter them through focused intention. That's mystical nonsense dressed up in scientific terminology, Vex replied, though his tone carried more curiosity than dismissal. Consciousness is just an emergent property of complex neural networks. It can't actually reshape reality. Kai activated the device, and both researchers stepped back as the air around it began to shimmer. Energy readings spiked beyond anything their instruments could measure accurately. But more unsettling was the way the laboratory itself seemed to become more vivid, more real, as if someone had suddenly increased the resolution of existence. Impossible, Vex whispered, his skin shifting to colors that indicated profound confusion. Apparently not, Kai said, but his attention was captured by something else entirely. A woman had appeared in his laboratory, not materialized through any kind of transport technology, but simply stepped from what looked like empty air as if walking through a doorway. Only she could see. She was breathtakingly beautiful in a way that seemed to transcend species barriers. Her hair flowed like liquid starlight, and her eyes held depths that reminded him of looking into quantum probability fields. But it was the way she moved that captivated him with a fluid grace that suggested she existed slightly outside normal spacetime. "Hello, Kai," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made his quantum equipment resonate in sympathetic frequencies. "I'm Melody Void Weaver. I've been waiting for you to develop the theoretical framework necessary to perceive me." Kai's engineering mind immediately began analyzing the impossibility before him, even as another part of him felt drawn to her in ways that had nothing to do with scientific curiosity. "You're human," he said, the word emerging from some deep intuitive knowledge he didn't remember acquiring. "I was human," Melody agreed, moving closer to his experimental setup with obvious familiarity. "Now I'm something that exists in the spaces between what you call real and what you call possible. Your equations are creating a bridge between those states." Vex's anti-gravity cushion bobbed frantically as he backed away. "Kai, this is some kind of advanced holographic projection. There's no such thing as interdimensional beings. Your friend is partially correct," Melody said with a smile that made Kai's pulse quicken. "I'm not exactly interdimensional. I exist in quantum superposition across multiple probability states simultaneously. What you're seeing is the interference pattern where all those possibilities converge." "That's impossible," Kai said, though his instruments were showing energy readings that supported her explanation. "Consciousness can't maintain coherence. Across quantum decoherence, the information would degrade faster than any biological system could process it." "Biological systems, yes," Melody agreed. "But we learned to become something more than biological during our exile. We became conscious patterns that exist in the quantum foam itself, sustained by love and hope and the determination to return home." As she spoke, she moved closer to Kai's equipment, and he realized she wasn't just observing it, she was somehow guiding its development. Through her presence, the crystalline arrays were resonating with frequencies that his calculations had predicted but never successfully generated. "You've been helping me," he said, understanding flooding through him. "The dreams, the theoretical breakthroughs, they've been coming from you." "From us," Melody corrected gently. "Humanity learned that consciousness isn't individual, it's collective, quantum entangled across space and time. When one human mind touches a compatible consciousness, all of us can reach through that connection." Kai felt something unprecedented happening in his chest, not just attraction to this impossible woman, but recognition of a deeper pattern. His research into consciousness-influenced quantum mechanics hadn't been abstract theoretical work, it had been preparation for this moment, this connection. "Compatible consciousness," he repeated. "You mean there are specific minds that can perceive you, minds that think in the right patterns?" "Yes, engineers who see beyond current limitations, scientists who dream of impossible technologies, artists who imagine new forms of beauty." Melody's expression grew tender. "People whose consciousness naturally operates at the intersection of what is and what could be." Vex made a sound that might have been fear or amazement. "The energy readings are increasing. Whatever this is, it's affecting the quantum structure of local spacetime." Kai realized his partner was right. The laboratory around them was becoming more than it had been, not changing, but expanding into additional dimensions that his normal senses couldn't quite perceive, but his enhanced equipment could measure. "What's happening to us?" he asked. "Melody, you're remembering," she replied, taking his hand. The moment their skin touched, Kai felt his consciousness expand in ways that human language couldn't describe. He was suddenly aware of himself existing in multiple states, simultaneously, the version standing in his laboratory, but also versions working in countless other realities, all connected by threads of quantum possibility. "This is what happened to humanity," Melody continued, her voice now resonating directly in his mind rather than through sound waves. "We learn to exist as conscious patterns, distributed across infinite probability states, but we need anchors. In baseline reality, people like you who can bridge the gap between dimensions. Through their connection, Kai could sense the presence of billions of human consciousness, all existing in quantum superposition, all waiting for the right moment to return to normal spacetime. They had been preparing for 3 millennia, learning to use love and connection as technologies that could reshape the fundamental nature of reality. If I help you return, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens to me? Melodies. Smile held promise and transformation in equal measure. You become something new, part human, part whatever you were before, part something that has never existed in this universe. Love across quantum dimensions changes everything it touches. Kai looked around his laboratory, seeing it now through quantum-enhanced perception. The equations he'd developed weren't just describing impossible energy sources. They were describing new forms of existence, new ways for consciousness to interact with reality itself. He turned to Vex, who was staring at them both with expressions of wonder and terror. Document everything, Kai told his partner, because we're about to prove that the universe is far stranger and more beautiful than anyone imagined. Then, he squeezed Melody's hand and felt himself begin to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, becoming the bridge that would help humanity return home. Nova Starweave had always painted what others couldn't see, but her latest holographic installation was showing her things that shouldn't exist at all. Standing in her studio on the art colony of Prismatic Haven, she watched colors flow across her three-dimensional canvas in patterns that seemed to carry their own consciousness. The piece had started as an abstract exploration of memory and loss, inspired by recurring dreams of civilizations she'd never learned about in any history texts. But as the weeks progressed, the artwork had begun developing its own agenda, showing her images of beings and places that felt hauntingly familiar. Despite being completely unknown, it's beautiful, but unsettling, observed her gallery representative, Thane, his crystalline body refracting the holographic light into rainbow patterns across the studio walls. The viewers report feeling nostalgic for places they've never been, homesick for people they've never met. Nova nodded, her emerald eyes fixed on the swirling patterns of light and shadow that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. It's like the painting is trying to remember something, not depicting memory, actually experiencing it. The artwork shifted as she spoke, colors deepening and taking on new dimensions that her equipment shouldn't have been capable of generating. In the flowing patterns, she could almost make out faces, landscapes, moments of joy and connection that tugged at something deep in her chest. Nova, came a voice from behind her, and she spun around to find a man standing in her studio. But standing wasn't quite accurate. He seemed to exist in the same way her holographic art did. Present but not entirely solid, real but slightly translucent. He was breathtakingly handsome in an otherworldly way, with features that seemed familiar despite being completely alien. His presence made her artwork respond, colors brightening and taking on new complexity as if recognizing something in him. I'm Phoenix Lightbringer, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made her holographic equipment resonate in ways she'd never heard before. I've been trying to reach you through your art for months. Thane's crystalline form flickered with alarm patterns. Nova, this has to be some kind of projection. Security sensors show no unauthorized entry to your studio. He's not exactly here in the conventional sense, Nova said, surprising herself with how easily she accepted this impossibility. Her artist's intuition, honed by years of translating the invisible into the visible, recognized truth even when logic rejected it. You're human, aren't you? Phoenix smiled, and the expression sent warmth spiraling through her chest. I was human. Now I'm something that exists in the spaces between imagination and reality. Your art has been creating windows into those spaces. As he moved closer to her installation, Nova watched in amazement as her holographic creation began to show clear, recognizable images, cities of impossible beauty floating among stars, beings of different species working together with perfect harmony, moments of love and connection that transcended the boundaries between worlds. These are memories, she whispered, real memories of things that actually happened. Memories of what was, Phoenix confirmed, and what could be again. Your consciousness naturally operates at the intersection of possibility and manifestation. When you create art, you're not just imagining, you're reaching into quantum probability space and pulling potential realities into visible form. Nova felt her understanding of her own abilities shift and expand. Every piece she'd ever created, every moment of artistic inspiration, had been more than creative expression. She'd been unconsciously accessing alternate dimensions where different versions of reality existed. "The dreams I've been having," she said, "pieces falling into place. Civilizations that felt familiar but don't exist in any historical records. They're memories of relationships between species that were erased from galactic history." "Exactly," Phoenix said, his form becoming more solid as her artwork continued to resonate with his presence. "When something is erased from baseline reality, echoes of it persist in the quantum foam. Artists like you can sometimes perceive those echoes and translate them into forms others can experience." Thane moved closer, his crystalline body reflecting the increasingly complex patterns of Nova's installation. "This is impossible. You're claiming that art can access alternate timelines?" "Art has always accessed alternate timelines," Phoenix replied gently. "Every time someone creates something that didn't exist before, they're pulling possibilities out of quantum space and making them real. Nova just does it more directly than most." Nova felt something unprecedented awakening in her chest. Not just attraction to this impossible being, but recognition of a deeper purpose. Her art hadn't been random creative expression. It had been preparation for this moment, this connection, with consciousness that existed beyond normal spacetime. "What do you need from me?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Help us become real again," Phoenix said, taking her hand. The moment their fingers touched, Nova's consciousness expanded in ways that human language couldn't describe. She could suddenly perceive the quantum probability fields that surrounded everything, see the infinite potential realities that existed in parallel to baseline existence. "This is what happened to humanity," Phoenix continued, his words now resonating directly in her mind. "We learn to exist as conscious patterns distributed across all possible realities. But we need artists, creators, people who can bridge the gap between potential and manifest reality." Through their connection, Nova could sense the presence of billions of human consciousness, all existing in quantum superposition, all carrying memories of relationships and connections that had been surgically removed from galactic history. They were waiting for the right moment to return, but they needed anchors in baseline reality, people whose consciousness naturally operated across dimensional boundaries. "The gallery opening next week," Nova said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "When hundreds of beings from different species view this installation simultaneously, their combined consciousness could provide enough quantum resonance to remember us back into existence," Phoenix finished. "But only if you're willing to become something new yourself. Love that spans dimensions changes the fundamental nature of consciousness." Nova looked at her installation, seeing it now through quantum-enhanced perception. Every swirling pattern was a window into alternate realities. Every color shift was a bridge between what was and what could be. Her art had always been about connection, about helping others see beauty they might otherwise miss. Now it was about connections that could reshape the fabric of reality itself. "If I help you," she said quietly, "what happens to my art, to who I am as a creator?" Phoenix's smile held infinite tenderness. "You become the first artist to create across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Instead of just depicting beauty, you start manifesting it directly into reality. Instead of showing others what could be, you help make it real." Nova felt her decision crystallize, like one of her holographic images gaining sudden clarity and depth. She had spent her life trying to capture the invisible, to make the beautiful tangible for others to experience. Now she had the chance to do that on a scale that could heal wounds carved into the structure of galactic civilization itself. She squeezed Phoenix's hand and felt herself begin to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, becoming the artist who would paint humanity back into existence, one impossible memory at a time. Luna Voidheart had negotiated peace between species that communicated through pheromones and others that spoke only in mathematical equations, but nothing in her diplomatic training had prepared her for the crisis unfolding across the Galactic Confederation. Standing in the emergency council chambers on the capital world of Nexus Prime, she watched representatives from 7 species argue in 17 different languages about events that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. The reports had been flooding in for weeks, ancient research stations coming online after millennia of silence, energy signatures appearing in empty space where no ships should exist. Most disturbing of all, beings claiming to represent a species called humanity that didn't exist in any official records, yet somehow felt familiar to everyone who encountered them. Mass hallucination, declared Chancellor Vec, his scaled hide shifting through agitation colors. Some kind of psychic attack designed to destabilize Confederation unity. The energy readings are real, countered Ambassador Prism, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into nervous patterns. Whatever's happening, it's affecting the quantum structure of spacetime itself. Luna listened to the debate while studying the classified reports on her personal display. 3 Confederation citizens had made contact with these alleged humans and subsequently disappeared from normal spacetime, though their biosignatures remained detectable on quantum sensors. All 3 had been individuals whose work operated at the intersection of consciousness and reality: an archivist, an engineer, and an artist. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Representatives, Luna said, her voice carrying the authority that had made her the Confederation's most respected mediator. I propose we establish formal first contact protocols rather than debating the existence of beings our own sensors have confirmed. First contact with hallucinations? Chancellor Vic scoffed. Luna's response was interrupted by the air in the chamber beginning to shimmer. Energy readings spiked as reality seemed to develop additional dimensions that their normal senses couldn't quite perceive, but their enhanced equipment could measure. A man materialized in the center of the council chamber, not transported through any technology they recognized, but simply stepping from what looked like empty air as if walking through a doorway. Only he could see. He was breathtaking in a way that transcended species barriers. His presence carried an emotional resonance that bypassed logic and spoke directly to something deep in every consciousness present. But it was the way he looked at Luna specifically that made her pulse quicken with recognition she didn't understand. "Greetings, council members," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made their translation equipment resonate in new frequencies. "I'm Atlas Starburn, representing humanity's diplomatic corps. We apologize for the unconventional nature of our return, but circumstances required creative approaches." Luna felt something unprecedented happening in her chest. Not just attraction to this impossible being, but professional fascination with a diplomatic challenge unlike anything in her experience. "You claim to represent a species that has no record of existence in Confederation archives. A species that was systematically erased from Confederation archives," Atlas corrected gently. "We were founding members of the Galactic Confederation 3 millennia ago. We were your partners, your allies, your friends and lovers, until something began hunting us through timeline itself." Ambassador Prism's crystalline form flickered with confusion patterns. "That's impossible. Memory manipulation on such a scale would require technology beyond anything in known physics." "Beyond anything in currently known physics," Atlas agreed. "But we learned that consciousness and quantum mechanics are far more intertwined than most species realize. When something erases you from baseline reality, you either cease to exist entirely, or you learn to exist in new ways." Chancellor Vec leaned forward aggressively. "Prove it. Show us evidence of this alleged erasure." Atlas smiled, and the expression sent warmth spiraling through Luna's chest despite her professional detachment. "The evidence is all around you, Chancellor. Every species in the Confederation has cultural references to an 8th founding member that somehow never gets clearly identified. Every historical database has gaps where information should exist but doesn't. Every trade route and diplomatic protocol shows signs of being designed for 8 participants instead of 7. Luna felt her understanding of galactic history shifting as the patterns Atlas described became suddenly, obviously visible. Her diplomatic training had taught her to notice inconsistencies in negotiations, gaps where information should exist but didn't. Those same gaps existed throughout Confederation history, surgical absences that her mind had somehow learned to navigate around without consciously noticing. The erasure was selective, she said, pieces falling into place, designed to remove specific information while leaving the surrounding context intact enough to function. Exactly, Atlas said, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her feel seen in ways no one had ever achieved before. But erasure that sophisticated leaves quantum echoes, consciousness that operated at the intersection of possibility and reality. Archivists, engineers, artists, diplomats can sometimes perceive those echoes. As he spoke, Luna felt her awareness expanding in ways that human language couldn't adequately describe. She was suddenly conscious of herself existing in multiple probability states simultaneously. The version sitting in the council chamber, but also versions negotiating in countless other realities, all connected by threads of quantum possibility. This is what happened to humanity, Atlas continued, his words now resonating directly in her mind rather than through sound waves. We learn to exist as conscious patterns, distributed across infinite probability states, but we need anchors. In baseline reality, people whose consciousness naturally operates across dimensional boundaries. Through their connection, Luna could sense the presence of billions of human consciousness, all existing in quantum superposition, all carrying memories of relationships and alliances that had been surgically removed from galactic history. They had been preparing for 3 millennia, learning to use love and connection as technologies that could reshape the fundamental nature of reality. What do you want from the Confederation? She asked. Though part of her already understood the answer, recognition, Atlas replied simply. Acknowledgement that we exist, that we have the right to exist, and that our return represents an opportunity rather than a threat. We're not seeking to reclaim territory or resources. We're offering to share what we've learned about consciousness, about love, about forms of existence that transcend physical limitations. Chancellor Vic's scales rippled with skepticism. And in return, help us heal the wounds carved into the structure of galactic civilization, Atlas said. The same force that erased humanity is still active, still hunting species that develop beyond certain thresholds of consciousness. Evolution. Together, we can create forms of existence that are immune to that kind of systematic erasure. Luna realized she was facing the most important diplomatic decision in galactic history. Not just about whether to acknowledge humanity's existence, but about whether to embrace forms of consciousness and connection that could transform what it meant to be alive. If the Confederation agrees to formal recognition, she said carefully, what happens to our existing forms of government, our individual species autonomy? Atlas's smile held infinite tenderness. You become more than you were while remaining exactly who you are. Love that spans dimensions enhances rather than replaces. But I should warn you, consciousness that operates across quantum states experiences existence differently. Diplomacy becomes more than negotiation between separate entities, Luna felt, her decision crystallizing like a solution reaching perfect clarity. She had spent her career building bridges between different ways of thinking, different approaches to existence. Now she had the opportunity to build bridges between dimensions themselves. She stood, her words carrying the weight of official Confederation authority. I move to establish formal first contact protocols with humanity and to begin negotiations for their readmission to the Galactic Confederation. As the council erupted in debate around them, Luna felt Atlas take her hand and experienced her first taste of love that existed across multiple realities simultaneously. River Dreamhaven had spent her life studying the boundaries between consciousness and reality. But standing in her research facility on the edge of Confederation space, 18 months after humanity's return, she realized those boundaries had become meaningless. The quantum garden she had cultivated with her human partner existed in 17 dimensions, simultaneously growing forms of life that transcended every known law of biology. The resonance flowers are singing again, observed Cosmos Voidwalker, his presence causing the air around him to shimmer with probability waves. Unlike the other humans who had returned to baseline reality, Cosmos maintained his quantum-enhanced existence, existing in multiple dimensional states that River's consciousness could now perceive. Directly, River smiled, adjusting the dimensional stabilizers that maintained the perfect balance between baseline reality and quantum superposition. Professor Thane from the Xenobiology Institute says it's impossible. Plants don't develop consciousness in three-dimensional space. Professor Thane hasn't learned to think in 17 dimensions yet, Cosmos replied, his form shifting through probability states as he tended to a cluster of crystalline orchids that existed primarily as mathematical equations made manifest. These plants are conscious because they're loved by beings who exist across multiple realities simultaneously. The garden had become a symbol of the new universe that was emerging from humanity's return. The initial fear and resistance had faded as more Confederation citizens experienced the profound connections possible with quantum-enhanced humans. Luna's diplomatic framework had evolved into something unprecedented, not just treaties between separate species, but cooperative consciousness networks that spanned dimensional boundaries. Zara's archives had expanded beyond mere historical research into active memory cultivation, helping species recover cultural elements that had been lost to the systematic erasure. Kai's engineering had produced technologies that operated on the intersection of consciousness and quantum mechanics, creating tools that responded to intention as much as physical manipulation. Nova's art galleries had become dimensional nexuses, where beings from multiple realities could share experiences directly. But it was River's consciousness research that had pushed the boundaries furthest, creating spaces where the barriers between individual awareness could dissolve entirely, while preserving the unique qualities that made each being who they were. River, Cosmos said softly, his quantum-distributed voice carrying harmonics that existed in dimensions her baseline consciousness couldn't quite perceive. The Council has approved the final phase of the integration project. River looked up from the emotion response of lilies she had been cultivating, noting the deeper resonance patterns that indicated serious thoughts. Over the months of their partnership, she had learned to read his multi-dimensional emotional states as easily as she could identify quantum field fluctuations. All species, she asked, though her expanding consciousness already knew the answer. Every member of the Confederation, plus the 47 species we've recovered from quantum storage. Cosmos confirmed. They want to experience direct consciousness sharing on the scale we've achieved here in the garden. The implications were staggering. River looked around their sanctuary of impossible flora, realizing it was also a prototype for what the entire galaxy might become. A place where different forms of consciousness could merge without losing their essential nature, where love could literally birth new forms of existence. Are they ready for that level of transformation? She asked, though she was really asking herself. Cosmos moved closer, his multidimensional presence causing the plants around them to glow more brightly. The question isn't whether they're ready, it's whether we're prepared to guide them through the transition. You've become the bridge between baseline consciousness and quantum awareness, River. What we've built together isn't just a garden, it's a new form of existence. As he spoke, River felt her awareness expanding through the quantum consciousness network that now connected hundreds of beings across Confederation space. She could sense Zara working in her dimensional archives, preserving memories that existed across multiple timelines. She could feel Kai's consciousness distributed through the engineering systems that now operated throughout Confederation space. She could experience Nova's artistic visions becoming manifest reality in galleries that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. But most powerfully, she could feel Luna negotiating not just between different species, but between different forms of existence itself, helping beings learn to love across dimensional boundaries that had previously seemed absolute. The systematic erasure, River said, understanding flooding through her quantum-enhanced awareness. It wasn't just targeting humanity. It was targeting any species that learned to transcend individual consciousness limitations. Exactly. Cosmos agreed. The force that tried to erase humanity from galactic memory was preventing the natural evolution of consciousness itself. By surviving, by learning to exist in quantum superposition, we became immune to that kind of systematic forgetting. Through their connection, River could sense the presence of the mysterious force that had driven humanity into quantum exile, not malevolent exactly, but limited in its understanding of what consciousness could become. It existed in a single timeline, operating according to rules that had been surpassed by beings who learned to love across dimension. Boundaries. What happens now? River asked, though part of her already knew they were approaching a transformation that would reshape the meaning of existence itself. Now we teach the galaxy to remember not just what was erased, but what was always possible, Cosmos replied. We show them that consciousness isn't limited to individual awareness, that love isn't constrained by physical boundaries, and that reality is far more beautiful and flexible than anyone imagined. As their hands touched, River felt her consciousness merge with Cosmos's quantum distributed awareness, and through him with every human consciousness that existed across infinite probability states. But more than that, she felt her awareness expanding to include every being in the Confederation who had chosen to embrace dimensional transcendence. The garden around them pulsed with gentle light as impossible flowers bloomed, each one representing a new form of consciousness that had never existed before. The morning glories sang harmonies that described emotions beyond individual experience. The crystalline orchids chimed with frequencies that existed in dimensions where love was a fundamental force rather than an emergent property. River realized that the erasure everyone had feared 18 months ago had indeed brought an era to its end. The era of consciousness constrained by individual boundaries, of love limited by physical proximity, of existence defined by single timeline experience. In its place was dawning something unprecedented, an age where awareness could transcend dimensional limitations, where love could create new forms of life, and where the universe itself might bloom into something more beautiful than any single world could imagine alone. The galaxy's amnesia had ended, but more importantly, the galaxy had remembered not just what had been forgotten, but what had always been possible when consciousness learned to love without bound. Aries, in the quantum garden where reality bloomed, according to the laws of love rather than physics, the greatest revolution in galactic history was just beginning to grow.